thank you so much for this, for doing the salon. And yeah, I'll let you take it away.
Thank you so much, Rodrigo, and thanks to everyone for joining us tonight. We are talking about the 10 out of 12 and the 6-day rehearsal week, and unpacking that from all of the various perspectives we hold in our various creative artistic disciplines. But before we get to that, we're going to introduce ourselves. My name is Pirronne Yousefzadeh. My pronouns are she, her. I am a Middle Eastern woman with just about shoulder length dark brown hair. I'm wearing clear glasses and a flower printed shirt, sitting in front of a bookcase and a couch. I am zooming in from the ancestral and unceded territory of the Onondaga, colonially known as Rochester, New York. And I am in a rehearsal room or in a tech. I am most often a director, and I tend to work predominantly regionally, occasionally in New York City, and also academically. And I'm going to pass the mic to Regina.
Hello, good evening. My name is Regina García. I am a Puerto Rican set designer. I am coming to you from the unceded lands of the Council of the Three Fires, better known as Chicago. Or most often called Chicago. I am a Puerto Rican white Latina with now very gray hair, shoulder length. I have glasses and I'm wearing gray, as is my usual. And I'm sitting in front of a messy bookshelf in my studio in Chicago. I am, as a scenic designer, I work most often regionally and in the Midwest and Southwest, with some exceptions, always as a scenic designer. And what else can I say? I think that's it. I will pass it back to you. Thank you so much for having me.
Lap, please introduce yourself to the group.
Hi, everyone. I'm Chi Chu. Most people call me Lap. I'm a lighting designer, working mostly, well, in the US. What else? Oh, I am coming to you from the land of the unceded land of the Chumash, now known as Los Angeles. What else? I am in a very sunlit yet boring wall behind me. I'm Chinese male with glasses now and a graying beard. And yeah, not a very interesting background I have. I feel like I'm missing something, but I can't remember. So back to you.
You can just, if you want to share with everyone just a little bit about the kind of work you do, where that tends to be.
I'm a theatrical lighting designer, mostly for new plays nowadays. A lot in New York and Los Angeles, and but I used to get around in other parts of the country a little more. I'm now teaching at UCLA, but most people know me, still think I'm at Cal Arts because I only started in the pandemic. So don't try to email me Cal Arts anymore.
If nothing else comes from this panel,
yes,
don't try to email.
That's all you need to know.
Great. Valerie, to you.
Hi, my name is Valérie Thérèse Bart. I use she, her, hers. I am zooming in from the land of the Lenape and Wappinger, colonially known as Yonkers, New York. What else? I am primarily a costume designer. I do like to dabble in scenic design. I work primarily regionally in theater and opera. My main focus tends to be on new works, world premieres, adaptations, what I like to call the taking back the classical narrative.
Great. David?
I am David Bengali, he or they pronouns, projection designer, zooming in from the land of the Lenape people in New York. And I have short black hair, wire-rimmed glasses, a blue shirt, and I'm wearing headphones. And I'm in my home office, which is a white room, white ceiling. So as I said, I'm a projection designer. I work mostly in live performance, theater, dance, and opera. Have been spending more and more time doing streaming events and broadcast related work and film and television work over the course of the pandemic. Happy to be here as part of this panel.
Lindsay, to you.
Hi, I'm Lindsay Jones. I'm a composer and sound designer for theater and film. My pronouns are he, him, his. I'm white, bald, with a graying goatee. I'm sitting in a dorm room and there are shelves behind me with laundry on it. I'm wearing a black shirt with a 9 Inch Nails logo on it. Let's see, what else am I supposed to say? I am zooming in from the unceded lands of the Paiute that I've just been learning about, and which is colonially known as Cedar City, Utah. I'm sitting in a dorm room. I work on Broadway, off Broadway, and in regional theaters around the country, as well as create music for film and television.
Yeah, Valerie, what's up?
I totally forgot about the accessibility visual description. I'm a light-skinned Southeast Asian woman with short black hair, wearing a green lacy top, sitting in front of my husband's desk back there against a white wall with a white door. Thanks.
Perfect. Thanks so much. So we're going to jump right in, and the first question that I want to pose to y'all is, how does the current sort of traditional rehearsal and tech model, the 6-day work week and the 10 out of 12, how does that impact you and your work as a designer? And Regina, I'll start with you.
Surely. I think we all know that with projects, especially theatrical projects, there's a series of variables that we're always navigating. Sometimes the type of work gets a little bit complex. Sometimes the process, especially with new work and new work development or devised work, is even more so, and takes time, right? It takes time to cook, takes time to massage and develop. And I think at the end of the day, as we bump into and get closer to rehearsal, if we are working in an environment that it's not, let's say, human friendly, let's say that, and that it's not being sensitive and always aware of the needs of the group, the creative team, cast, crew, and the immediate community, the 10 out of 12 and tech just gets to be a little bit more exhausting and frustrating. I think what I've seen is the toll it takes on especially on my colleagues' turnaround time when dealing with notes, and the crew and staff that has to be there to give us access to the space. As a community, it tends to be a little bit above challenging and quite overwhelming. And I think when we're working in those pieces that perhaps haven't been budgeted properly, looked at from all angles, from the macro level, and you start dividing it into, let's say, cost per hour, and in a design that, it's not done until it's done, then just also financially it gets to be a bit of an issue for a lot of members in our community, especially kind of arriving to that tech after a long process of development. So I think what I've seen especially in the last 10 years, is just an increase of more work and a larger demand on the calendar and the time available, and not enough time to consider the needs and what everybody at the table needs to be able to be successful. So that's my immediate comment in response to that. It's an important time to have these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Lap, how does that schedule impact you as a lighting designer?
The amount of other work that can be done when we're so focused on having, 10 out of 12, 10 working hours out of 12, and those are actor hours really. And we have a problem getting work done and with the turnaround, sorry. And the notes that can be done the next day, and never mind the human marathon wear and tear and the that toll, but also just what the space can handle sometimes. I mean, one example, and this has happened on more than one show, is that, oh, we need a paint note, and this affects the entire look of the set, and yet we don't have enough time to do this and have the paint dry. And so we're going to hold off on this the next time we're allowed to have a chunk of time to be able to do that, but yet we continue working forward looking at the wrong thing. So that's just one example of just the non-human toll, but a very pragmatic toll on the space. That's my one example. I'd love to hear from others. That's kind of specifically set and lighting in some ways, but it affects all of us.
Yeah, and I can imagine that, there can be at times also a conflict or a challenge in making sure to coordinate between lighting and projections. And so I will pass it to David to talk a bit about how you navigate the schedule as it has operated in the sort of pre-pandemic status quo.
Sure. So, the projection designer generally is part of a projection team, and we're responsible for creating content and programming that content and getting it mapped onto the stage. So we're talking about, on a very small show, there might be a very small team. On a larger show, there might be a larger team. But as Lap was referring to, when we say 10 out of 12, of course, we're talking about cast on stage hours. And like every department, the work that projection needs to do continues outside of that 10 out of 12. So if new content ideas come up during tech, or in particular, if they come up during the production meeting or the creative meeting at the end of the day, then those new edits and those new animations, they have to happen at some point. So that might happen working late into the night, or it might happen starting well before the cast arrives the next day, to make no mention of physical notes if we're just talking about content notes alone. So the time spent working by everyone in the projection department is always much longer than the 10 out of 12 number. And of course, then there's travel time outside of that, which sort of ironically, working away from where one lives, there might be less travel time because you tend to maybe be housed near the theater. Working in the city where you live, you don't know what anyone's travel time might be. It might be an hour to get from wherever they can afford or interested in living to where the theater is located. It could be more. So, and apart from this is already pretty demanding. And I think that it's sort of important to realize that many of the people working in the projection department are being, as in many departments, are being paid not by the hour, but by the week, or sometimes just a flat fee. So if you ask an assistant or an associate to come in at 8 o'clock and be there until 1 o'clock, they aren't being paid any more than they would be if they came in, at 1 and left at 11. And I think that the toll that this can take on particularly younger folks who are trying to get into the industry and feel like they may not have a choice other than to do this is something that's really important to consider.
Absolutely. And clearly my cat is also very passionate about ending the 10 out of 12 and hence joined us for the conversation. Valérie, tell us a bit about how it operates for you as a costume designer.
Yeah, yeah. Obviously, the turnaround time is at the forefront of this conversation, and specific to costumes is that our work is directly linked to the actors, and so we have a very limited time to like see the things on their bodies before they have to be on stage. Once they're on stage, you're kind of at the mercy of like how long they're going to be on stage in that particular costume. And if it involves a quick change, for example, and the quick change isn't working and things need to be rethought, but they're still in the costume, then no work can happen. And also, again, you know, with call times and shop schedules, there's also a very short time that the costumes can be worked on and notes can be worked on from the night before. So if a shop, for example, comes in at 9 and call time is at 12, there's 4 hours to work. And if, and God forbid, you need to do fittings, like when do these fittings actually happen during tech? If like a top didn't work and you need to shop for a new top, when does that actually happen? While you're sitting in tech.
And
it's magic.
And you and I have had an experience where the shop wasn't in over the weekend of 10 out of 12s.
Oh yeah,
and
I will definily bring that up.
Uh-huh.
That's another big gripe I have.
When I gave Valérie the note that will go down in my history as the note I've been the least happy to give, knowing full well just how hard it was. Thanks to all of these other variables. So Lindsay, everyone else is like hustling and bustling and you need quiet time. How does it work? How's it working for you?
It's challenging. I would say it's quiet time is certainly a relative term, and I've learned to live within that. But I just want to echo both what David and Lap are saying in terms of, I love the way Lap put the non-human cost versus the human cost, because I really feel like that is a key element of it. And what David was referring to about our younger colleagues who are just coming into the business and are working excessive hours for not a lot of money. And it is difficult, I think, for those people to stay in the field. It's exhausting, and frankly, they can get paid better and work less somewhere else. And so I think we as a community of artists lose people specifically because the work conditions make it difficult to stay in. And from a sound perspective, you know, frequently I'm dependent upon having a sound engineer who not only implements the stuff that I need to implement, but also runs it, hopefully with, you know, inhuman-like precision, but they are not inhuman. And excessive hours in which they are working around the clock to try and keep up with the show ultimately dulls their senses in terms of being able to react responsively to creative problems, and potentially, you know, I think leads to a place where people are like, I don't need to do this work anymore. And that's a real issue.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'll just, you know, add, I agree with and echo, I think, so much of what I've heard from all of your respective viewpoints within the tech process. And as a director, I feel like the sort of current MO is one that really sort of restricts one's ability to try and to do trial and error in tech, that like there's very little room to be like, hey, I have 3 different ideas for what the opening gesture of the play could be. Let's try them and see which one we like. But rather we end up sort of having to default to the thing we feel the most confident about, with the hopes that we'll get to come back to it and do it in work notes later, which on a regional theater schedule often doesn't happen. And you know, in terms of the sort of hidden hours of work for a director, while designers are doing fittings and notes calls and creating more content, you know, we're often either joining in for some of those notes calls, you know, to get ahead of things with the designers before actors show up for the day, or we're typing out actor notes and emailing them to the actors individually, because equity requires us to email them individually, which if you have a cast of 12 takes a very long time. And so those hours outside of tech or during the dinner break often end up being consumed with that other work. Not to mention the human cost that I think I will see some nods of recognition of, which is also this idea that we've accepted that a certain part of the process requires that we treat our bodies and our health like absolute garbage. That, you know, that we come out of tech and say like, well, you know, I was in tech, so I gotta like eat a salad, go to the gym, take a walk, see the sun, like all of these things that we've just sort of denied ourselves because we've been working around the clock, both during tech and outside of it. And so with all of those challenges, like, as you know, people are having these conversations about whether or not they can end the 10 out of 12, whether or not they can go to a 5-day work week. And, you know, many theaters have made some pretty good strides during the pandemic in sort of setting new parameters for how they'll return to live theater. As folks continue to have these conversations and try to, you know, wrestle with, you know, the repercussions of making these decisions, like, what do you want them to know? What do you want producers and artistic directors to know? If you had the ear of one right now, and you could whisper something in their ear to affect, you know, and influence the way they'll go about approaching this problem or this challenge of the way we work, what would you want to share? Valerie, I'll start with you on this one.
I think very generally, this type of scheduling is basically a capitalist structure that we're all feeding into. And, you know, we talk about the human cost, right? And capitalism is very much anti-human. It's more about the product than it is about the human toll. So I would definitely you know, bring that up, and how it creates barriers to, like, you know, unless you're white, cis, maybe single, male, if you fall outside of those categories, you're probably experiencing some sort of barrier, right? Whatever intersection you identify in, which makes it harder to participate in theater. And as we talked about, remain in theater and make this sustainable. So those are things we need to talk about. And like the No More 10 out of 12's group has really been working at a multi-pronged approach, right, of gathering data, you know, like hard data, and solutions showcasing other institutions and theaters that have abolished the 10 out of 12's, and in some cases also the 6-day work week, and even showing examples of like their tech schedules and calendars and how they've been able to like configure all of this around to make it work, as well as testimonials, which is like the human factor, right? The real human factor. And we've been collecting these testimonials, a lot of them anonymously, and it's heartbreaking to go through those. And you know, we had a social media campaign where we you know, just had like we featured some of those. And it got shared quite a bit, and a lot of it was like, oh wow, that's me. that's totally me. And it's painful to like realize that you actually relate to that and share that same pain. And it's just like, why, you know, why are we putting ourselves through that? Like, why are we suffering for our art? And you know, there's so many things like the scarcity mentality as well. Like, you know, we're all afraid of like not being able to get back to work. And so it's just like, you know, we just kind of keep going. We've all been so busy that we just like kept going. But this pause and these last 16 or so months have allowed us to like really look at the structure and this antiquated structure, and like, why is it even in place? Like, what is the history of 10 out of 12's? Like, why is it that we actually subscribe to it, right? It turns out equity is really the only place where it is legally bound that we have to, but it is really like, I think it's a maximum. It's a maximum amount, which means it can be less, but everyone always goes for the maximum amount, and everyone else all the other unions just follow that same model, which also includes academia for some reason as well. So we're trying to like break out of that cycle.
Yeah. And academia has been following it to some extent for good reason, to prepare people for the professional world. If that's what you're going to have to do for the next however many decades, it makes sense. But yeah, I hear you. It just also means that more people have been pulling these really exhausting hours. Other thoughts from y'all on what you want producers to know from your experiences and your standpoint as a creative team member, as they start to wrestle with whether or not they can make this bold step forward into a brave new world of 5-day work weeks and shorter tech days.
I wonder if producers see how little gets done in the last 2 hours of a 10 out of 12 on stage. That might be illustrative for them. I mean, we've all seen this, huh? We're just limping to the end, and then to think we might have to do it again tomorrow.
Yeah. Go ahead, Regina.
I also wonder if, and I would love to ask, like, is there a way for them to be, let's say, to gather collectively, right? If we can gather as a collective, even when we're on schedule, for them to kind of check in or call in. Not everybody in the space is doing, even when we are on schedule for whatever was planned months and years in advance, that doesn't mean that everybody in the space is having the same experience. Are those 15 minutes of breaks going to be enough for somebody to get to the bathroom and back? Is that really what everybody needs, or does everybody need really half an hour to take a moment to gather, to regroup? If there is a task at hand creatively regarding storytelling of something that is happening on stage, do we have time to actually be present in the moment to fix it together as a team, as a community, instead of just pushing that schedule, just having the 15 minutes where some folks are really not going to really take advantage of the breather, of going outside to go to the corner, stretch the legs, relax. I think there's a real disconnect when we get to that tech about what is the timeline to opening, and it just becomes we're just kind of punching in. And I think if they would had an opportunity to really take one day at a time and really listen to everybody in the room, right? On stage, backstage, in the house, I think we will be much more productive and efficient in getting to that opening.
I think the thing I would say to producers is two things. The first is, you can do it. You can totally do it. It's going to be okay. It is, I understand that we've all been under this schedule for 80 years. And it is scary to reimagine the way that we've all worked for a long time. It's intimidating. That being said, based on the information that the No More 10 out of 12 groups has been gathering, we've been learning that the hardest part is saying yes. That after you're willing to make a commitment, it all kind of can be reconfigured and rethought. And I think that's really important for people to hear, and is to say, it's possible. There are theaters that currently exist on this model. There are theaters that are changing their model now as a result of this. So if you really believe like, well, my theater can't change, I'm here to tell you it probably can. And if it really can't change, then it might be time to look at why it can't change. I had a conversation with an artistic director of a smaller theater a few months ago, and he was like, well, I have to keep 10 out of 12s because I only have 2 days of tech and then I open my show. And I was like, okay, well, I understand why you need those 10 out of 12s, but the reality is that's not enough time. To do it properly, you need more time than that anyway, and you may need to look at that. And that might be something you're going to have to adjust. And the second thing I would say to producers and artistic directors is that the community of artists who work in your theaters, they are your community. They are your partners. And we're all, as part of that community, going to have to make changes and sacrifices ourselves in how we work. And it is going to be confusing. It's going to be an adjustment for all of us. And so I think if we look at this problem as a community and not just like, if only these producers would change everything, we'd be all set. Like, we're all going to have to do this. But if we look at everything as a partnership, working with producers together to make this change, it is possible.
And Lindsay, there's not just one model.
Totally, 100%.
Something I would say that kind of follows along with what Lindsay was saying earlier about people staying in the industry or not, particularly after coming through the pandemic and looking at students who've been graduating from programs over these last 2 springs and deciding what are they going to do. And people who have been trying to work their way forward in the theater. So just speaking from the point of view of projection, the skills that are required of assistants, associates, animators, and editors to deliver the kind of show that artistic directors and producers want to put on their stage at all levels of theater are often about the same. A small off-Broadway or regional theater that doesn't have a large budget, the assistant animator on that show, the skills that they need to provide the services to build that show along with the designer are the same skills that they could use to get a job working in the commercial theater, working in film, like working in jobs that either have a working structure that would work better for them, or if it's just as difficult, which it is in many industries, just as many hours, but will compensate them for those hours, as opposed to assuming that there is some kind of benefit to someone of working in the theater. So like, we all just want to be there. And of course we wouldn't be doing it if we didn't love it. But I think that more and more it becomes difficult for me as a designer to hire and retain talented people because they ask me for advice and say, why should I keep doing this if the budget doesn't support a lifestyle? And I would say, it's hard to answer that. And I can't, in my own good conscience, ask someone to do a lot more work and provide the same skills that they could elsewhere for much less. And so the ability of both the designers and the assistants to provide what's being asked of them can be quite a challenge. And I think that there may be, I don't want to, of course, speak for any producers or artistic directors, but I think that in some cases, there may be some assumptions that certain levels of theater or certain kinds of jobs just aren't going to be able to pay as well, and people need to get on board with that. And I think that to follow on with what Valerie was saying earlier, actually is going to cut out probably the majority of people who you otherwise could engage in your theater. And given that right now, I think a lot of organizations are rightly seeking to figure out how to, this is obviously a vague word, but to diversify their staff at all levels. I think that the only way to do that is to look at this fact that like someone could go elsewhere and have a better deal for the same things that you need from them in your theater.
Yeah, and that's a human cost too, right? Like if we're turning people away from our field every time we go through another sort of inhumane tech, that's a loss we simply can't afford. Yeah, and I would just add that to everything y'all are saying, that I something I've been thinking a lot about in relationship to building more humane processes is it's not the end of the world to do one less show per year, because I think so so much of the challenge or the pushback is born from how tightly packed a production schedule is at most regional theaters, which also I think results in this kind of cookie cutter approach that the one person show gets as much time as the musical, gets as much time as the two-hander. And, you know, while I, as a director, don't think there's such a thing as an easy play that's worth doing, or a play that doesn't take too long that's worth doing. That there are different ways to distribute that time, certainly, that could be more tailor-made to each play and to each group of artists and what serves them best. And we would have the kind of like elasticity in our calendars to do that if we weren't trying to pack one show after another. And given the fact that every show always loses money, it's not actually going to be the worst thing ever for the bottom line either, to say, you know what, we're going to do one less, we're going to build in one more week of load in, we're going to build in 3 more days of tech or whatever it is, and see how that goes for a year, knowing also full well that if it doesn't totally work, that we can refine the experiment again the next year. So I think part of it, though, is related to sort of haste, and it's easier to have a template to work from, right? It's faster, but it's not necessarily better. So I think we all know what the pushback would be is, and it's I think it has something to do around budgeting. Just my sneaking suspicion that it's going to have something to do with the coin. And I want to hear from y'all, like, okay, is it more expensive? Like talk a bit about like what the cost benefit analysis, if you would, around the current practice and what would happen if we changed it. Would we break the bank? Lap, what do you think?
Just not being on the producing end, I don't know, but certainly there are some theaters that do nothing but 2 10 out of 12 and you're off to the races. And you basically, in that case, and if you're trying to pull off a 5-act play, nobody takes foreign intermission, but you know what I'm talking about, is that there's only plan A. And and that's it. And that's all you have time for. That's a little bit of a turn and burn product, you're not making anything new, and you have to live with this product, whatever we open with, or whatever we can find we can tweak in previews and the notes before that, if you have a few, but you live with this warts and all. And so that's the kind of work you're producing. So what's, quantify that as well, if that ends up being what you get. I don't know what the producers, and this is so generic because there's all different sorts of backgrounds. Some places have higher cost of labor. Some places are probably dealing with, especially regionally, a bigger design population or freelancers that come in and out, and maybe there's issues there. I would, love to hear from somebody on that end that is actually more pro 10 out of 12s. Of course, we're a little bit preaching to the choir here, of course, and so I would be fascinated to hear what the reason to keeping that is. I just keep going back to actors as well. Certainly an actor working 10 hours, they're not going full out. They may be there for figuring out blocking, or they're sitting around a lot. Is that the best use of their time as well? If since this is where we're all revolving around these hours, because actors' equity is their tradition. I'm sure we won't be working any less in some ways, but if we only had the actors for 7 or 8 hours, that's a long time too, to be on your feet and doing something athletic is what they do. That's a long time. So Yeah, I like to hear from some producers. I can't really put words in their mouth, but some of those things come to mind.
Yeah, and even if it is a 7 or an 8-hour day for the actors, it's still going to be a 12-hour day for designers, right? It's just not going to be like a 16-hour day for designers anymore.
12 hours sounds luxurious.
I mean, right? I know, but that's still technically, in any other industry, you'd be getting overtime, right?
Yeah.
And I don't know about y'all, but I've certainly been witness to / heard stories of the 11 p.m. or 11:30 p.m. injury, or the actor who goes into a week of previews for a musical not having much of a voice left after 2 10 out of 12s. And while there's obviously a certain amount of responsibility every actor on stage has for preserving their health and, taking care of themselves, we all know that like the more sleep deprived we get, the sort of worse our decision making savvy becomes. That's just a biological fact. So it's impossible to feel secure about that being a safe and productive workspace with that many hours accruing day after day. Lindsay, you look poised to speak. Kick it.
All right. Yes, Pirronne, you're so right. Some of the research that we have on the No More 10 out of 12's website points directly to this point, which is that producers believe that the least amount of time that their theater is dark, then therefore the more times they have with an audience in there, the more chance they have to make money back. But the problem is actually human beings, that there are scientific studies that were created that basically show that an 8-hour workday is the maximum productivity that a human being can effectively deliver on a consistent basis. And that's where the 9 to 5 sort of workday came from. If you start to work longer than 8 hours, your productivity scientifically sort of drops, just because you start to lose focus and it takes longer to achieve the same thing. If you work multiple days of over 8 hours a day, your productivity not only drops between hours 8 and whatever, it also drops significantly for each successive day that you work. So when producers are saying, I'm concerned about the cost, what I can say is the science actually shows that you are losing 50% of your productivity for each day that you stick on the schedule. So while you may think that trying to pack everything into the least amount of days is the most efficient use of time and labor, it actually isn't. And that by spreading the workload over more days with less hours, you will gain more productivity and ultimately save money by using people at their top ability rather than not. So that's on our no more 10 out of 12s.com. Feel free to look that up. It's available to you to research.
I do want to be a little bit contrarian here. And since we're talking about like, well, what are the costs of eliminating 10 out of 12s? And as much as we are talking about the potential costs to producing organizations, and I see, in the chat, there's some questions about like some of those costs that are not in the control of a producing organization, like the cost of rent. I'm sort of interested to talk about that. There's also a cost to the designers and directors of doing this, which is tough, particularly if we're saying like, so maybe on a production, maybe the assistants are lucky enough to be on a production that is paying them daily or weekly. It is almost never the case that in the theater industry, that is happening for designers and directors. There is a fee, and your ability to pay your rent and also to advance your career depends on being able to do enough shows. And if one show that used to be a 3-week commitment now becomes a 4-week commitment, and you multiply that out over the number of shows you're doing within a year, that same thing that we were talking about that feels like a calculation for a theater deciding its schedule that's going to impact everyone who's working on the shows as well. So I'll admit that I'm, on the one hand, I find it very difficult to continue the working pattern that we've all been living in. But I'm also very nervous about thinking that a commitment to a show is going to be a longer period of time without actually paying any more. And also just what does that mean about how many other shows are possible to work on? So I'm not sure exactly what the solution to that is, but I wonder a little bit in terms of what Lindsay was saying about productivity. Is there a world where we're not actually saying it's gotta take this many hours to do a show? Well, if half of those are lost hours anyway, are there ways to figure out how to be more efficient and reasonable about our time and to think about what our goals ought to be on a given production, rather than extracting the most possible labor and execution out of human beings? If we were like, this is the thing that we think we can make with the resources we have that we can be excited about in this length of time, no matter what we do, I think it will be something beautiful. And we've all worked on a show where you had 3 days to do it and it was beautiful, and you've had 3 months to work on it and it was beautiful. So, I think that there's just a question that I have about where these changes fall. Are we talking about fewer hours? Or are we talking about the same hours over more time?
Lap, I see you put your hand up.
I'm so Zoom savvy.
There you are.
Can we play a game and talk about this and what would we gain instead of lose by not having 10 out of 12? And, I actually would appeal to the scenic designer is how much notes can get done the following day if we have consecutive 10 out of 12s? Like, are we looking at the same thing over and over again? And I'm not remembering the math quite yet, but it seems like if we do a 10 out of 12, like say noon to noon, and people come in at 8 or 9 in the morning, realistically, because of cleanup that needs to happen and the crew that needs to break and all that stuff, really you get an hour and a half to 2 hours of actual notes that can get done in the space that's split up between the set designer and lighting notes and quiet time and who knows what else, quick change rehearsal, but that's usually during tech because we have actors. But just to play the game, like we would gain that work being done by other people just having access to the space. We would gain that. That's been my big peeve. It's not enough notes being achieved when we just stack the use of the space constantly with all hands on deck.
Yeah. And I also just wanted to add to your point, David, and while we're here, why not, dream a little dream with me? Like if we are going to if it is going to be a 4-week commitment for designers, as opposed to a 3-week commitment, and if it's going to be adding a week for directors, then, sounds like our fees need to go up. And, I think that's really what it comes down to at the end of the day. And the fact that I think, another sort of hidden problem of all of this that is, I think, exemplified by the 10 out of 12 and all of the work that happens outside of that, those 10, that term is so reductive when you actually think about what everyone but the actors are, and also actors are learning new pages sometimes, or, there's they're working outside of that time too. But is that our fee structures, I think, collectively bargained for us, don't actually really take into account prep time for meetings, and all of the content building or notes that we do outside of those hours. And so I think what this whole conversation actually really heightens for me, or brings to the fore, is how much unpaid work we do invisibly that we need to continue to make visible to producers. Because if we are talking about lengthening it over, an extra week, let's say, that doesn't mean we're working less those weeks. It just means we're still working 12-hour days. It's still going to be a really long day for us. But there's maybe a chance that we'll be a little bit more rested and a little less angry at the world when we are, sort of getting to the sort of final miles of the marathon there. Yeah, Regina.
I was going to say, a different kind of pay structure that allows us to be a little bit more flexible and nimble in response to discoveries in the room, prepping for tech. That might also mean that we have to think about the time between, and it varies by theater, of course, and by genre and all that, like the time between when a team is ready for a designer run into towards tech. Our involvement in those conversations, or our involvement and presence in the room, might have to be looked at differently, and how we can prep for that transition into the stage slowly but surely prior to that day one of tech. But yes, it will demand that we look at the fee structure and who's there and when a little bit more carefully. And what we've heard from some TDs as well is that the expectations, it's interesting what they're saying in some of the testimonials that we've gathered, is that the discussions and conversations are there about feasibility and amount of work that is possible in those quick turnarounds that Lap was talking about. But the demand for perfection and the demand for, let's say, stretching out those resources keeps increasing regardless of the size of what had been allocated originally. So they're in a tough spot as well, and they're trying to navigate those conversations as well with their PMs. And I think what they're asking, or at least of what I'm thinking too, is conversations like you were saying earlier about not all shows demand the same kind of schedule. Let's make sure that we are responding in real time to the real needs of the show that we're putting up. Anyway, thank you for that, for letting me share that little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Keep those questions coming in the chat. We're going to get to those momentarily, but I do have a couple more for y'all. And, the first might be a little bit of a leading question. I tried really hard to find a way to make it a neutral question. It didn't work out so well, but I'm curious to hear how y'all are thinking about this, about the rehearsal week and about the 10 out of 12 in relationship to the larger calls for social justice, for equity and inclusion in our field. How do these things connect for you? Valérie, of course, you talked about like sort of the capitalist underpinnings of our current structure, which of course is racism's bosom buddy, capitalism. So would you like to sort of expand upon that and talk a little bit more about how these things are all in the same constellation with each other?
Yeah, I think that, again, we've like said this over and over again, but the schedule, the way that it is, and this umbrella and this whole structure is not very human friendly. It just doesn't look at what the needs are and doesn't take into account what people's needs are. I think about myself and like all my intersections and my identities, being a woman of color, a mother, an immigrant, like all of those things almost feel like they're like a strike against me. And that I've had to work 10 times harder in order to get to where I am. Of course, I recognize the privileges that I've had to get to where I am. But, I think about everyone else that is also coming up, and we've talked about, the next generation, like questioning, right? Like, why is it that I'm going to be putting myself through that the way that y'all have been doing, right? When there's like, because now we have the language, now we have the tools, and now we have like the resources and social media, right? So everyone is really starting to like question, why are we suffering for our art? And it closes, and it really does close the door to major communities and marginalized groups and underrepresented. And so you look around the room and suddenly you realize it's like, where's the diversity? Well, this is exactly why. This is one of many gates that prevent people from being able to not only enter, but also stay. And I feel that once that one gate has been taken down, it'll allow people to have more conversations, such as, pay equity and pay parity. Once we get more people, to come in and to talk about these things, right? So that's where I'm at. I'm sure there's more.
Talking about our communities in particular, I was looking at, the last 10, 13 years of my career. And yes, I was most definitely a late bloomer. And I was just looking at the names and looking at the teams and the artists that I had the real pleasure to work with. And I counted 27 people that I won't work with again in theater because they have decided that it's not worth it. This structure doesn't work. Financially, emotionally, spiritually. That's why I'm part of this working group. It's unacceptable.
Yeah, I also would just add in terms of, the intersectionality of it, that I think another aspect that we don't really talk about enough is that the current schedule is also built on the premise that one is like in perfect health and childless, that there isn't if somebody has a chronic health condition, like there are very few doctors who would say the best thing for you to do is to spend 20 hours over the weekend in a dark theater working your butt off. So, if we are going to really be inclusive in every way, thinking about how those hours and also the break structure, as you were saying, Regina, like give somebody the opportunity to take their insulin shot when they need to, give somebody the opportunity to, nurse and not try to squeeze that into a 10-minute break because that's not 10 minutes. So so I think that there's I think a way in which the anti-racism conversation can open up a lot of different conversations about the intersections across multiple identities and multiple things that we carry in our and should have space for in our work to show up as our full selves.
One of the things that you said in our group, Pirronne, that has always stuck with me since the very first time you visited us was the idea that as people get more and more exhausted, they get less and less careful, and not just physically careful, but you also just personally careful. And so that can range from being inconsiderate or unaware, but it can also, as people get more and more tired, they can become hostile, or they can become irritated more easily, and or say things or do things that they wouldn't do if they had their full capacity. And that can absolutely intersect with how BIPOC artists are treated, how women are treated, how, name it, anyone outside of anyone basically working in theater can be inconsiderate and say things or do things that can be harmful, long-term harmful. And that is, I think that's a big component of this, is how to make our working environment more inclusive, but also more sustainable and more humane on a personal level. And that's really important.
Yeah, and I would underline that and just say that, like, as a person of the global majority, anytime I step into a predominantly white space, it is already baseline harmful, period, even when everybody's being nice. And so then you add, like, the way tempers flare, or who gets it taken out on them when like something isn't going right, you know, and how that disproportionately will fall to, you know, the BIPOC woman in the room, you know, as an example, me, hi, you know, and like if we're already like, if it's already harmful, like baseline, it's already harmful because I'm, you know, I'm the minority as the global majority in the room, then, you know, you add that and it can, you know, I've had some pretty hefty therapy sessions following a tech week about things that went down. And like, and I do wonder, like, would that have happened if people weren't so sleep deprived, had seen the sun, maybe eaten a salad, hugged their children, like, and just done the things that like sort of recenter all of us. We all have our practices that recenter us. And if those things go away from all of us for a whole week or whatever, in order to get it, because the show must go on, then we're all meeting each other at our worst, not at our best. Yeah, so I want to, and this is going to have an audience participation component. I would love to hear folks popcorn, like what would your ideal process look like? And so you can feel free to put things in the chat, you know, the aspects of, or how you would describe that. I'll go ahead and start and say like free daycare at the theater for all the artists is one of my fantasy ideas of what an amazing tech process could be, where people can actually see their kids throughout the day of tech and not feel like they're missing their children's lives in order to make art. Other thoughts, and feel free anyone else to pop in here, my dear panelists, and also audience, go ahead and put those thoughts in the chat as well.
I think I'll say, oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
I've kind of said this sort of thing before, but I guess my ideal thing would be that if everybody were being compensated for the number of hours that they are putting in, then that would take the responsibility away from each individual to decide whether they feel like they should or shouldn't rock a particular boat, or whether they do even have a choice of saying anything. It would put it onto the community as a whole to decide how we want to use the resources that are available, which we know are always limited.
I would ask for better in-theater sitting workstations, especially for some of us who are curled over a desk a lot. Those theater seats and a board does not help my posture, and I've taken to standing up while teching now. I'd ask for music stands, but that's just jerry-rigged. But you know, I feel like you have to be a very, very big designer to ask for seats to be taken out so you have a normal human seat in a room that's not sloped. But that's a health thing more than 10 out of 12.
No, it's both.
It is both, yeah.
Yeah, that's great. It wouldn't be so gnarly if we weren't doing it for so long every day, you know. Yeah. What else?
I mean, so, you know, like you said, Lab, I mean, you know, we are subsidizing our bodies and our mental health in order to make this work somehow, and not getting compensated for it. So, you know, yes, please, ergonomic, please. I was going to say, I think removing the 10 out of 12s in the 6-day work week is one thing, and obviously it'll, you know, institutions will have to look at the overall schedule and their overall season. And I think to do so mindfully, you know, like you mentioned, Pirronne, about how, you know, not every show is cookie cutter, and not just like, you know, using a template for like all the shows, but like really looking at like what the needs are. Because I think that'll also, and also to think about staffing, like how to appropriately staff so that, you know, you don't have like the two-hander show showing up and everyone's busy with a giant musical, and then suddenly the person working on like the two-hander is like, somebody help. Also starting techs on weekends when the shops aren't open. I just never understood that, you know, where you have very limited support, and it's like, and you know, we're all looking at the same wrong thing, for an entire weekend until Monday when we can work on it is really hard. And I never really understood that. So how can we somehow adjust the schedule just overall?
Yeah, and if it can't be, then like doing, you know, like finding time in the rehearsal period to like go do like go look at that shirt under lights, go look at, you know, like, why do we have to wait till tech then? If that's gonna, if that, you know, there's always a solution. We just have to get in front of it.
Right.
Yeah. Want to lift up here in the chat: a better process, sufficient turnaround times, enough time to process notes, guaranteed meal breaks, strict controls on after tech note sessions. Yes. This does feel like a real, true, impossible fantasy. Free daycare and a 9 to 5, including notes without actors and workstations. Yes. Yeah. So we got a few questions in the chat here, and I want to start with this one here from, oh dear, where did it go? Stand by. From Matt Otto, who wrote, I might be out of the know, but the few companies that I see leaving 10 out of 12s behind are just moving towards 8 out of 10s. Is that much better when it should be closer to a 7 out of 8? What great question. Lindsay.
So every theater is approaching it differently. And it's important, I think, for people to know that that based on what we've discovered, no theater runs like any other theater. That's just, I don't know why that is, but that's just how it works. So there is a different culture and a different structure in almost every place. So each theater really has to make their own decision about what works best. But there's no denying that by just dropping back to 8 out of 10s, that's just a start. It's really meant to be a first step. When you look at the demands of We See You White American Theater, the very first demand is to eliminate 10 out of 12s and 6-day work weeks. And then there are 37 pages of other demands, which are equally as valid and equally as valuable, and they must also be considered and studied. And I mean, like, this is really just trying to get that process started in hopes that more and more people will start to look at ways to create a more humane work environment. So if theaters feel like they can produce at a 7 out of 8.5, let's say, which some theaters are currently doing, then yeah, great, amazing. We all know that an 8 out of 10 still means a minimum of a 12 to 13 hour day for crew and designers, and sometimes stage management. So it's not like changing 8 out of 10s is going to mean that everyone working on a show will only work 8 hours a day. But by removing those 2 hours, it's an incredible start. It's a step in the direction of how we can start to reimagine our working environment and make it a more sustainable environment for the long term.
Thank you, Lindsay. That was great. And I just threw into the chat the We See White American Theater website and the No More 10 Out of 12's website. If you haven't visited them, please do. Check out the demands, sign up for the No More 10 Out of 12's list. There was also a great question here from Melissa. For those of us who operate small theater orgs and must rent space for a production in New York City and cannot afford to rent a theater for an additional week in order to elongate the tech process, where do you see opportunities for designers to work / collaborate differently in order to keep the most humane tech schedule and achieve a designer's vision? With the follow-up question, will remote meetings and work aid in this in some ways? What do you think, y'all? That's a pickle.
I mean, this doesn't exactly help with the issue, but I would say, you know, one place that more tech time could come from is out of previews. Of course, we love previews. We don't learn as much about what's happening until we're in previews, but a preview day is very difficult to get much done because we have to turn around the entire theater from performance mode to working mode and back, and put in the breaks and put in time for costume changes and wardrobe. Like, all of these things mean that it's really very difficult to get a lot done. So maybe 2 fewer previews could be a way to get that tech time back without extending the rental period. I recognize by saying this, I'm saying, well, that's 2 fewer paid performances. And for a small theater company, that may be equally challenging because part of what's paying for the rental of the space are audience members.
I would also add that I think it would be great to like see if you can't rent it for an additional week, if you can arrange to like have a design meeting in there, like, you know, basically like how do you like what are other ways on the front end of the process for the team to get to know the space as much as possible, because I feel like that can, while that doesn't replace actual tech hours in terms of queuing and whatnot, I feel like so much of that tech time is also about like really getting to know the architecture of the space. And sometimes the first time we're stepping in there is like very shortly before, you know, tech's actually beginning with light, hang and focus and load in and whatnot. And so if there's a way for the team to be in there together, I think that could actually, in a weird way, you know, create a little bit more of a foundation of like shared vocabulary. Lap, you were about to say something, I think.
Yeah, going back to something Lindsay said is that no theater has the same requirements, or no theater does it the same way, or has the same needs. That's the tough thing about policy making, and what would looking for a common solution for all is tough. You know, so you know, the example of like, do we have to add a week somewhere? It's like, well, I don't know, depending on like if you're going from like 2 10 out of 12 period to, you know, I don't think it's adding a week. I mean, I don't want to put words in someone's mouth, but is it you know, or is it something with already 4 or 5 days of tech, and eliminating 10 out of 12 cuts 2 to 4 hours out of that week? And so it seems like a trim rather than a, you know, adding another week. And I don't know, what everybody's situation is different, and policies are tough, but certainly when actors equity you know, put into writing and policy at 10 out of 12, you know, that became some sort of norm. Oh, this is possible, and off to the races we all went, and here we are. So I don't know. I think there's a lot of case specific scenarios, but it takes you know, this No More 10 out of 12 group have done a lot more research than I ever have, but maybe there's some good examples there, or solutions.
I just want to say really quickly that on our site, we do have a list of theaters that have made the commitment to make this change. And we've been able to get certain information about how their tech schedules have been reconfigured. So on nomore10out12s.com, there are examples of how you can do it. Lap is right that in a typical regional theater schedule, most regional theaters usually have 2 10 out of 12s. We're talking about basically taking 4 hours out of that time and putting it somewhere else. An example of where that could be is that staging rehearsal maybe converts to 4 hours of tech that's that day, or we consolidate in some other way around that, so that it's. And I think to David's point earlier, he was worried about designers having to spend an extra week on a show, which is a completely legitimate concern. And I think that in certain cases, where if you're working on an off-Broadway show and they have 6 days of tech and then 4 weeks of previews, like that's a legitimate concern to redo that schedule, because that's a lot more time. In a regional theater setting, we're really talking about, if we eliminate the 6-day work week and 10 out of 12s out of a tech process, it's really, we're basically talking about a day, that we would move. And that's doable. That's doable.
Yeah, I think though where things get a little trickier though is in this question and Melissa's question around renting a venue, because those venues don't usually rent by the day, they rent by the week. And so, I think that, I don't know, Regina, if you have a thought on this matter.
Yeah, I have a feeling Yeah, because it is a pickle, like you said, a big pickle. And I would say let's not underestimate the importance of design conference, if in whatever format or in whatever way, like what you were saying earlier, Pirronne, if you can get all the humans involved in the same room for a day or 2 or 3 consecutive days. 3 is a lot. I know it's like magical. 3 is like beautiful. In the same room to discuss the play, shortcomings of the space, shortcomings of the play with the shortcomings of the space, any way where you can gather to focus that time into the work ahead. Yeah, front loaded as much as possible during the period of time where that rental is dark, if possible, so that you can actually walk it and feel it out. I think you're going to be much more successful when you get to designer run and into tech, because it is limited, right? Everybody's doing multiple things, but if you can just get that one day or 2 afternoons of discussion and sharing and planning, that can be golden. And it happens a lot here in Chicago. If we can get, especially sound and lighting and costumes and set will show up to support for sure. To gather as a team together, that is, it makes a huge difference when things coming up in the rehearsal process.
Yeah, or even like seeing another show in that venue together, like that
Sure.
can be, I think, another really great way to learn the space a little bit, or hear what the speakers sound like, or all those Lindsay nods with that face. Yeah, they're not good speakers, are they? Well, I know that we could continue this conversation much longer. There's many nuances, and as y'all were saying, sort of case specific scenarios to discuss, but alas, our time has come to its end. And so I just want to thank you all so much for being part of this panel, this conversation. I want to thank Wingspace for hosting us on their Zoom account. Thank you, Wingspace. Please check out the No More 10 out of 12 site. Go to the We See You site if you want to learn more about the demands that Lindsay referenced. And thank you and have a good night. Rodrigo, to you, my friend.
Thank you. Thank you all for joining. I'm going to leave the Zoom open for anyone, if anyone wants to hang out, say hi, say thank you. Just a reminder that EL has posted on the chat where you can find our upcoming salons. And just a reminder that our panelists are paid out of pockets, out of our members' pockets. So if you want to support the salons and Wingspace community, please go to the PayPal that should be also in the chat, and you can write salons to let us know that you want to support the salons. You can join our mailing list as well. And yeah, spread the word about the salons. And thank you all so much. I want to thank all of the salon committee people tonight from Wingspace, Tanya, EL, Christine, Edward. This is my first time producing by myself, so I want to thank you all for the support. And yeah, you're welcome to say thank you, and you can turn your cameras on and say thank you to our panelists. You can, yeah, thank you so much.